Hi, it's Clinton Wheelock from Informatech, and I'm here at Techcelerate London. I'm here with my colleague Tom Pringle, who's head of technology research with Ovum. And Tom has had the unique opportunity to be chairing on multiple stages here at the AI Summit this week that is part of Techcelerate. And Tom, although I think you've had the somewhat unique opportunity to be chairing in the AI Finance Summit, the Implement stage, as well as the Deliver stage, if I'm not mistaken. It sounds like you're seeing some common themes among the speakers and some of the interactions that have taken place in different parts of the event, and I'm curious about your impressions so far.
Absolutely. I think it's been a real pleasure to be able to see different perspectives from each of those different stages. And I guess when I kind of first came to the event, I was expecting kind of a different set of themes on each different stage. And what I've actually heard is a lot of common themes that have threaded through the presentation. So it doesn't matter whether it was kind of a large bank that's been in business since 1856, one of the cool startups that's been talking, or whether it's some point in between where we talk about the public sector and some of the bodies that are developing around the topic of artificial intelligence. What's been really interesting about it has been, although technology of course is key, we know that artificial intelligence requires data to work, and lots of complex algorithms which are kind of crunching that data and bringing those insights and actions that hopefully improve business or outcomes. One of the really key things that's come out has been the people aspects and the culture aspects. So, and to be fair, I think it's something that you could apply to many different areas of technology as they kind of start their journey into an enterprise adoption, right? So, as AI is being experimented with, creating the right conditions for it to flourish in an organization, be it public or private sector, has just been absolutely one of the core themes, again, from just about every speaker that I've heard over the last couple of days. The other area that I would think about would be the connections that are so important to making it successful. So when I mention the technology being very important, people tend to think about people like data engineers and data scientists, and very smart people who are running the numbers, doing the math to make AI happen. But sometimes they can operate a little bit isolated, somewhat siloed away from the business. And one of the interesting things about data, of course, is when you look at data, it's interesting in its own right. When you start to add that business context into the data and creating those insights, it starts to become really actionable information. And just about every speaker who's talked about their own experiences in kind of incubating AI in their organization has really hit on that point, which is, you need to connect the business with those technical experts in order to create the best outcomes possible. And I think the final one has been, it's an emerging technology, so an experimental approach is very important. Now, let's not go completely crazy and say you have to experiment with everything all at once, all at the same time. Big bangs very rarely work out particularly well. But what has been interesting is seeing what people have said about being brave, being bold, so going after something and trying and seeing what impact they can make, because they know that their key stakeholders, the executive sponsors who are kind of governing these programs, funding them, are looking to move the needle on the business outcome. So when they've been doing the work up front, they've been looking to find what are those outcomes we're looking to influence, and how can we best deploy data technology and the artificial intelligence atop those two things in order to achieve that outcome improvement.
Really an interesting set of observations, I would say, and I think very consistent with what I've seen as well, which is kind of the overarching theme that AI is no longer a skunkworks project within these organizations. It's no longer a pilot or an experiment. People are really looking at the practical ways in which they need to put mechanisms in place to scale and commercialize on a much broader basis. And what are the governance tools that need to be put into place? What implications do these initiatives have on organizational structures, much less technology architectures within these organizations? So very practical implementation considerations really seem to be the nature of the watchword here at the event this week. And so with all that in mind, I'm just curious what your conclusions are about what does this mean about the state of AI adoption and the state of maturity within these enterprises, because clearly it's a larger scale than it was a year ago, and it's likely to be even larger scale a year from now. But where do we stand in the life cycle from your perspective?
Now, it's really interesting when you kind of think about the development of the technology, and to use your words, going from that skunkworks world where we were kind of doing this thing under the covers over here, and it's starting to come out into the light, as it were, and be started to use as a regular tool in the enterprise technology toolbox. And there's a couple of different areas I'd look at in that. The first is probably as how it's implemented and rolled out to a bigger audience. So out of that data science kind of world and into the regular business users every day. Now I have a saying that the best technology is the one you didn't realize that you were using. Right, and I see a lot of success in is building AI-powered capability in as features to other solutions. So if my day-to-day job is defined by a particular go-to app, it could be CRM, so something on the customer side, it might be finance and ERP, but the use of AI to power features which make my work easier is something that's been very successfully trialed and I see being adopted in bigger organizations. Simply because it means my job gets a little easier. I didn't have to go elsewhere to figure out the insight. It's just delivered right there to my desktop in my go-to app, and there it is. Now, the complexity of the technology and the data behind that might be substantial, but me, at the end user, I don't have to worry too much about that. I'm simply consuming the insights and the capability. So that kind of invisible approach, if you like, in terms of expanding it out by building it into people's day-to-day, is one of the most successful. And then just briefly to your earlier point about the frameworks and the governance of it all, there's been sort of twin themes on that I've seen the last couple of days, and those have been from the ethical stance,
yes,
and huge focus on, are we doing things responsibly? And I've talked about for some years, as you well know, about the ethical implications, the use of data, particularly personally identifiable information. We know that there's lots of insight and value in that. We also know that brands, big enterprises, be them again public or private, who can be seen as trusted users of that information, that data, do a lot better. So on that grander scale of the ethical approach required, there's been huge focus on delivering really clear, transparent frameworks of ethics and how we're going to use information in an ethical fashion. The second piece to it, again, and I think it goes back to one of my earlier points about, how do you operate this in the organization? What kind of governance do we have? And it reminds me a little bit of the days of talking about data governance.
Right.
And that meeting, and I'm afraid it's a classic, people, process and technology,
yeah.
right?
Right.
And I think that's being brought up to an even bigger level. So not just data for satisfying regulatory reporting, but data that's defining how we treat our customers, and really things that have an impact on consumers. And therefore, the level of focus that's had at the show as well has been really palpable, and something that's generated a great deal of interest amongst the audience and the attendees.
Really interesting insights, and I think overall, we can assume that the focus and the maturity of thinking on areas like governance and ethics will only continue to progress between now and some of the AI Summit events later in this year in other cities.
Yeah.
And indeed, as we're watching all of that, I think it'll be really fascinating to take a deeper look at the case studies that emerge from some of those larger scale deployments. But in the meantime, thanks, Tom, for your time, and looking forward to the rest of the show.
Great, thank you, Clint.
All right.